Hi everyone, I'm Steve Smedley, Associate Director here at Acuity. Welcome to the 6th of 8 webinars we're holding in October. I'd also like to welcome back Luke and Rahul from Oaks, who are going to explore the latest fundraising opportunities, take a look at some of the key steps to be successful, and say a little bit about the importance of evaluation.
Brilliant. Thank you, Steve, and thanks for having us back. I think, yeah, we're delighted to be back. And for those of you who were here in the summer for our kind of previous webinar, thank you for returning. And for those of you who are new to us, I'm Luke Southall, Managing Director of Oaks, and that's my colleague, Rahul Bissoonauth, who's Director of Business Development at Oaks, and we'll talk a bit about who we are in a second. But yeah, thank you all for coming today, and yeah, hopefully we can make this a really useful session for you all. So really what we're here to talk about is income generation within the social housing sector with a particular focus on trust and foundation grant funding. So the last session that we did was quite a kind of general overview to some of the income generation areas within the sector that we look at. But today we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into grant funding. So yeah, hopefully there's quite a lot to be excited about in that area for the sector, and you can get quite a lot out of this today, I hope. Well, thanks, Rahul. Can we skip on? So just in terms of the structure of the session, we're going to be doing introductions just to give you a bit of background about who we are and what we do and kind of why we're here today. But then we're going to get straight into the grant funding landscape in terms of particularly how it obviously applies to the social housing sector. Then we're going to be looking at some specific opportunities. So not only we're going to pull out a few key ones that we think are really relevant right now for the sector, but then also talk a bit broader about how you can identify and find opportunities on an ongoing basis. Then we're going to talk about some of the absolute fundamental principles of actually being successful in this area. So what are the things that we need to bear in mind when we're submitting applications, preparing applications, identifying who we want to apply to, how do we really strengthen that case of support, and then just some extra areas for consideration that we think are also fundamental about the organisation when you're applying, and about how you can make sure every single factor of review when you're looking at an application can be banged on before you submit. So just start with a little bit about us and who we are. So yeah, we're a company called Oaks, and I think the kind of the simple way of summarising our purpose is that we help socially minded organisations to raise their game. So for us, we've always, in the 12 years of our kind of existence, we've been almost exclusively focused on not-for-profit organisations and helping organisations who have a genuine commitment to doing good and to achieving genuine social impact. And for us as individuals, that is what we're passionate about, and we are connected to the company and to our clients, and we care about the work we do because that's, as individuals, we are passionate about as well. So for us, it's all about socially minded organisations who want to do good and want to improve the level of their service, and we help them do that by supporting them on the business side of what they do. So those three key areas at the top there that have been highlighted in bold, that is pretty much everything we do hangs off those three areas. So strategic planning is of critical importance to every organisation, and we do that across multiple sectors, and we help organisations to determine what it is they're going to be doing, what they're about, what their sense of purpose themselves are going to be for the next 3 to 5 years, which is of course absolutely fundamental. And then the next part of that is, okay, we've got a strategy, we know what we're doing, but how do we make that happen? Where does the money come from? How do we build the business case? How do we make sure that what we've set out in our strategy is actually achievable? And then the final part is, we've got a strategy, we've got a plan of where we're going to get the money from, but how do we actually then go and do it? So for us, a huge part of our support is to actually go in and help do and bring some of this to life. So that strategic planning and income generation part are very much consultative in the traditional sense that we're going in, we're working with an organisation to develop a plan. And the final part of implementation is when we're actually part of the team going out and bringing it to life, activating those plans. So it's 100% a collaborative long-term strategic process for us. Those three verbs at the bottom: challenge, help, support. For us, it's about being a critical friend, but being there for the long term. So it's not just about coming in and getting quick wins. For us, what we get, where we can give value and where we get our satisfaction, is by helping make genuine change within an organisation. And I think what really sets us apart, I think, is where we work. So as you can see here, it's really multi-sector. So right from the start, when we formed in 2008, we were very much focused on sport and community sport sector. But over the years, it's really evolved right across the not-for-profit world, in terms of right from education organisations, which could be multi-academy trusts and universities, through to international development charities, social housing being a huge focus as well for us now. And when we reference corporates, it's about helping the private sector, when we do work in that space, to actually develop CSR campaigns, or to develop charitable giving, and to think about how they can actually go and support on a community angle as well. So for us, we have this unique perspective, I think, across all these different sectors, which helps us to bring best practice from different areas to any particular client that we're working with. So it's quite broad, but always focused on that community impact perspective. Right. And here's just a taste of some of the different clients that we work with. So you can see that breadth hopefully there. So we've referenced some of the social housing organisations that we work with, such as Longhurst Group and ASTA. Then some of our more high profile sport for development organisations that we work with, such as UEFA, which takes us all across Europe. Then national governing bodies of sport, such as the LTA. We work with CCG. So yeah, this is just a snapshot of some of those clients, but I hope that brings to life a little bit about that breadth. And it can be really small, localized, grassroots organisations, right through to international organisations who are looking to change the world. So for us, yeah, there's no client too big or too small in terms of who we support. Well, and those who were here last time will probably recognise this wheel, and this is just an introduction, segue into the next part when we talk about trusted foundations. But when we are focused on income generation support with our clients, because 99% of them are not-for-profit, pretty much all the areas we would support can fall into these sections here. So starting from the top, and there, in terms of looking at procurement and thinking about actually how can we help organisations to drive down costs through having more efficient and more commercially minded procurement processes. Asset utilisation is a huge one for us in terms of helping organisations, whether that's physical assets, whether in terms of facilities and how they can better monetize the facilities they've got, or it could be assets such as the people they have in their organisation. Actually, how can they develop consultancy offers with the people that they've got? So utilising the skills that they've got in the organisation to actually generate additional revenue. Charitable trusts and foundations, I won't labour that point today, level up right now, because we're about to go into that in greater depth. The fundraising area can encompass everything from digital fundraising to event fundraising. So anything that's kind of individual given focus, high net worth individuals, the whole fundraising area as well that we look at for all of our clients. Corporate partnerships is a huge one, and I think a growing one for social housing as well, in terms of connecting our clients with potential businesses and corporate organisations who are looking to partner with not-for-profit organisations to further their own CSR agendas. And then business development is kind of anything else within that. So how can we generate more sustainable trading revenue? We're helping organisations at the moment develop a social enterprise model to deliver long-term sustainable income as well. So there's lots of different things that come into that mix. Today we're going to focus on trust and foundations specifically. And I think at this point I'll hand over to Rahul.
Thank you, Luke. So yeah, just to go on from what Luke was saying. So in our last webinar, what we spoke about, we focused very much the conversation on community investment and generating income for community investment. And a big part of that, and we did touch upon this last time, is around grant opportunities. And we know that, you know, most people on this call will have, you know, accessed grants at some point in the past, or at least tried to access grants in the past. So, you know, we're not going to talk too much about the basics. But we firmly believe that grants are a huge opportunity for housing associations, you know, particularly smaller housing providers, to help, you know, ultimately make your resources go further by bringing in income from elsewhere. Much of the community activity that you and your partners do will be eligible for grant funding, and there are lots of opportunities out there. So I guess just to set the scene, there are over £5 billion worth of grants given directly in the UK every year from trusts, foundations and other institutions. This is a growing figure year on year, even this year. And, you know, those might be grants from as little as £500 to, you know, upwards of £100,000 at any one time. They might be single year awards, they might be multi-year awards. Almost all of them will be project related, whether they're revenue or capital. But there are so many opportunities, and you know, they're changing on a weekly basis. So, you know, new opportunities come out all the time. Some have deadlines, some are open on all of the time. And new foundations and trusts spring up, you know, even in today's day and age. So it's a constantly evolving landscape. This is, you know, primarily a big opportunity for smaller housing providers, and you're related to community organisations and tenant management organisations. You know, primarily this is for the, you know, most organisations accessing grants in this country are registered charities, you know, constituted community groups, and other not-for-profit societies. Which is where, you know, some of the larger housing associations, you know, might not be the best fit for them. We believe it's a great opportunity for the housing sector because of your unique position within some of the, you know, you have access to some of the nation's most vulnerable communities just by the very nature of your residents and their needs, which does put you at an advantage in this funding environment compared to other organisations who might not have that direct access. And crucially, because you have that direct access, you're in a good position to be able to bring in partners from other sectors, you know, so other delivery partners. So, you know, there might be projects and activities that you're not best placed to deliver, but there will be lots of organisations out there who want to access that funding, who want to work with your residents, but you might be best placed to lead some of those consortiums and those proposals. So we firmly believe it's a big opportunity for the sector. It's not necessarily a new opportunity, but something that, you know, the conversations we've had with housing associations, not necessarily being tapped into as much as it could be. Now, obviously, the landscape has changed significantly over the last 6 or 7 months. You know, without getting too much into COVID, but the key kind of changes in the sector, in the grant giving sector, have primarily been around. So I guess the immediate reaction was to temporarily close some grant opportunities. So, you know, that funders have, rather than fund, you know, their existing priorities and their existing themes, you know, took a pause. You know, they decided that actually there's no point in us investing in work that we were going to invest in pre-COVID if many of it's not possible to be delivered. So many took a momentary pause and started to shift priorities. So what we've seen is, you know, probably in March, April, May, is the opportunities started to, you know, disappear for a short period. But now that they've, you know, since then, you know, we've been reporting every week on new opportunities that have been opening. And there are actually a huge number of grant opportunities out there for organisations of all shapes and sizes. And they continue to appear every week. So positive signs, although it is quite a competitive landscape as well. So, you know, organisations, as you'll know, organisations are crying out for money at the moment, which means that many of the grant opportunities that are coming out are being heavily oversubscribed. So it's crucial that when you're looking at these opportunities, you recognise that there is a time risk, I suppose, a resource risk in applying, but there are some good opportunities out there. The main themes that have emerged from grant makers who, as a result of COVID, is you know, focused on supporting organisations to adapt their delivery from on the ground support to, you know, to digital delivery to you know, to delivering new services as a direct result of COVID. You know, lots of organisations having to, lots of delivery organisations have to completely transform what they do and how they support their communities. And then secondarily to that, there's a big theme emerging around organizational resilience. So some of those organizations that, many of the organizations in this country that provide services to vulnerable people are struggling financially, or are likely to struggle financially over the next 12 to 18 months. So it might not even be an immediate impact. So funders are recognizing that and coming up with opportunities to try and address that. And ultimately, what's a positive sign is that we've seen an increase in the number of grants being awarded. So we've had some funders actually, some big funders reporting over 1,000% increase in the number of grants they made over the last 6 months compared to the same period last year. So the grant sector is traditionally, historically a strong sector, where other income streams might struggle, particularly around corporate partnerships, for example. Grants have historically always been a relatively stable income stream on the whole. So it's positive signs, but obviously quite a competitive landscape. In terms of what funders are funding during this period, there are lots of things, but the kind of key five takeaways from this are, they're prioritizing projects that are helping to tackle social isolation, particularly with people in their homes a lot more at the moment. So building digital connections between people, face-to-face connections, socially distanced where possible. Providing direct support to the most vulnerable groups, so whether those are individuals from Black and minority ethnic groups, or those are people who are with a disability, who are particularly vulnerable at this period, or older adults. So they're prioritising, even though I suppose before COVID-19 these were priority groups anyway, even more so now they're really prioritising work with those groups. The key things around improving mental and physical health as a result of inactivity, not getting out of your home, there's high kind of mental health risk at the moment. Organisational resilience I kind of just spoke about, and then funders are starting to get out in front of this whole employment challenge we're going to be having over the coming months and years. So funding projects that are helping people to use this time to build skills and ultimately create work over the coming period. In terms of finding these opportunities, so there, as I said, there's quite a few appearing every week. There are lots of places to look. So on a local level, you could be looking at your police and crime commissioner, clinical commissioning groups from the NHS, your council for voluntary services. So in Birmingham here, where we're based, it's BBSC. But there are replicas of that all over the country. The community foundation networks who manage funding on behalf of lots of other institutions are always a good place to look. And there are also lots of other local networks. Rather than me read off that list, I think the key is to constantly be on the lookout. All of these local organisations will either have opportunities of their own or be managing funding on behalf of other organisations, or pointing you towards grant opportunities that are constantly evolving. There isn't really no single place where you can look to capture everything. So what we do as an organisation with our clients is make sure that we're signed up to as many kind of newsletters, looking at as many websites from these organisations as we can, in order to make sure that we're aware of whenever a new opportunity comes out. On a national level, it's always a good thing to do to sign up to some of the biggest funders in the country. So people like the Big Lottery or the National Lottery Community Fund, Children in Need, Sport England. Some of the major funders all have their own newsletters that are free to access, and will always give you kind of fair warning of upcoming opportunities. There's a great tool in Funding Central, they do have a base level which is free, but also paid subscription depending on your turnover, which is effectively a database of funders, which is updated on a daily basis. So we use that a lot ourselves to keep up to date with the latest grant opportunities that come out. And there are lots of platforms like that, but we tend to find that Funding Central is the best one, or the most cost-effective one, should we say. There are lots of other kind of paid subscriptions. So there's an organisation called Invisible Grant Makers, or a report, should I say, called Invisible Grant Makers, that comes out every year, which is highlights those opportunities that are not necessarily publicly available. So they might not appear in the paid for databases like Funding Central. So these kind of hidden opportunities. There are consultancies in the sector like ourselves and Beware of the Bull who produce weekly, fortnightly, monthly newsletters that highlight some of these opportunities. And then there are various procurement portals that you'll be used to using for contract purposes, who also advertise grant opportunities as well from time to time. So I guess the key to it, that there is no kind of one size fits all strategy for finding these opportunities. It's being signed up to and looking at as many of these opportunities as possible, having someone dedicate some time every week to make sure they're keeping on top of these opportunities, because like I say, it's a moving landscape and opportunities are appearing all of the time. So then, just picking on a couple of opportunities. So we are going to go through 3 today, but as I said, there are so many. But these are 3 that are open right now and ready for you as smaller housing associations to go for. One that was actually, I think, only announced yesterday or the day before, possibly, is an opportunity from the Charities Aid Foundation. So CAF, it's their resilience fund. They're distributing up to £20 million, made up of grants ranging from £10,000 to £100,000. So potentially some significantly sized projects there. It's focused on organisations whose community activities have been reduced or been forced to adapt as a result of COVID-19. So have you, for example, had to, in order to meet the needs of your residents and your communities, had to completely change the way in which you might deliver support services to those communities? So it's to help you adapt effectively. Prioritising those working with the most vulnerable and disadvantaged groups. Those ones I've kind of already covered, but there is quite an endless list on their website of the ones that they support, and I'm pretty sure that almost all of you as organisations will be working with one of those groups. Crucially, the grant award can't exceed 20% of your last reported income. And it is quite a tight deadline. So the deadline is the 12th of November. So they've only given, well, this is their first round effectively, but they've only given around 2-3 weeks for organisations to turn around a submission. Interestingly, you must be able to spend all of the money by the 31st of March next year. This is obviously quite a quick fire round, a quick fire response from the funder to help organisations through the next 6 months. So definitely one worth looking at. You don't need to be a registered charity to apply. So if you're not a registered charity, as we know many housing associations are, you just need to provide additional supporting documents in the application process. The only prohibiting factors possibly are around turnover. So your turnover must be between £50,000 and £10 million to apply. They're prioritising revenue funding rather than capital funding in this round. As I say, we can't offer too much insight at the moment as it's a completely new pot. But definitely one to look at. The next opportunity we wanted to highlight is an opportunity with Sport England. So they're the national body responsible for funding sport and physical activity here in the UK, or in England specifically. They have, again, I think this was yesterday or the day before as well, announced a new round of funding under the broad banner of Return to Play. So for any of your organisations or partners that are working on a kind of sport-focused or have an element of sport-focused delivery, Sport England are willing to contribute up to £50,000 to help you improve local community facilities so that you can reopen and adapt your facilities to meet the kind of social distancing measures in order to get sport and physical activity back going again over the coming months. Again, it goes without saying, they're focusing on those organisations working with the vulnerable and disadvantaged groups. This can be for capital projects, so making improvements to buildings or open spaces where you have security of tenure. Crucially, you need to be able to launch the project within 6 weeks from submitting your application. There is no deadline, so this is a kind of an open pot at the moment, but it should be noted that previous rounds of Sport England emergency funding that came out since the impact of COVID-19 have been paused as a result of being oversubscribed relatively quickly. So whilst there is no deadline, it kind of pays to move quite quickly with this one. The project must be coronavirus related, and they are prioritising those projects in the most deprived areas of the country. So all of these details, obviously, the slides, etc., will be shared with you, but all of the details of these funds are on the organisation's websites as well, where you can find a lot more detail than what we've tried to get across here. think that's back over to you, Luke.
Well, yeah, so the third and final one we're going to focus on today is the ISLA Foundation Tipping Point Grants. And this is very much focused on, obviously, on the impact of COVID-19, and the foundation always looks at supporting vulnerable groups and vulnerable members of society. And this particular stream at the moment is looking at supporting creative solutions to homelessness. So they're looking at giving grants of up to £40,000 as well, which can be capital and revenue related project costs. And a big focus for them, and I think always has been, and it's something to really bear in mind, I think, when we're talking about the whole of the landscape and how we actually develop grant applications, which we'll come on to shortly. But they're really keen on the kind of storytelling component and actually focusing on stories that have emerged from the pandemic, with a particular focus on how that has helped to inspire that community togetherness, and how that can lead to potentially creative solutions to the homelessness challenge that we've got, the crisis. So they're very much looking at that hearts and minds component and actually bringing this to life, some of the challenges and solutions. So a really, really good opportunity, and one that we think is definitely relevant to a lot of social housing providers as well. Eligibility criteria, so there's no minimum turnover expectations, but the maximum turnover for any eligible organisation is £10 million, and they are, again, linking to that creative solutions and the community togetherness angle, very much prioritising organisations that are user-led and actually have good level of kind of beneficiary involvement and consultation, which are components we'll talk about a bit more shortly as well. Okay, so what our grant maker is looking for, I think it's really important to think about the framing of this in the perspective of the funders. As Rahul's mentioned in the previous slides, they have a finite amount of resource. It's competitive beyond belief at the moment in terms of the whole not-for-profit sector turning towards grant opportunities. So it's really crucial to think about what it is they are looking to do, the funders, when we're applying. What is it that they want to achieve, and how do we make sure we can put the best possible case forward to say why, out of all that finite resource that you've got, we're kind of deserving of some of that funding. So these are just a few of the key things to consider that we've highlighted here. And the first two kind of go together a little bit, I think. So ambition and innovation. So they're looking for things that can really make a difference. So they don't want to see something that is completely tried and tested and just going to be more of the same. What they're trying to do is actually, as Rahul said again, about helping resources go further. Actually, if the funder can give a grant of X amount, actually what can that achieve, and how can that really be something scalable? How can it take a challenge and provide really creative solutions that can have a long-term impact? So they're looking for that, projects that are ambitious, but of course, as always, realistic. And linked to that is, well, a new approach. If we're trying to solve challenges and problems that are systemic or embedded and have been there for a long period, we're probably going to need some quite interesting approaches to try and tackle that. So more and more now, funders are looking for approaches that take on new thinking, new ways of working, new ways of collaborating. So innovation, ambition, absolutely really crucial. Let's think about not restricting the limits of what we can do. The only caveat to that, it has to be grounded in some level of reality, of course. So there needs to be, which kind of comes to the next point around fit and track record, it has to be grounded in some level of confidence of evidence that actually the approach that we're suggesting can work. So if we're looking at fit and track record, let's think if you as a social housing provider were to go and apply for funding to do a project linked to, let's say, animal welfare, that might not be such a good fit in terms of the kind of experience that you've got and the connections and your track record and your skill sets and what separates you from other organisations applying. So there has to be a logical connection. So things like the ISLA Foundation focus on homelessness would be absolutely be a really good fit for a social housing provider. It would make sense that you were looking to deliver interventions that would tackle that challenge. So there has to be a logical connection, and you can demonstrate why you're best placed to tackle that problem, you and whoever your partners are in any particular project, and that you've got some evidence of track record. And that doesn't necessarily mean this new innovative project you're proposing you've delivered before and you've got reams of evidence of it working, but it could be that you've got evidence that you really know that user group, or you've delivered some of those interventions before, so you know, or you've got evidence of doing similar things in other areas. So there has to be something that you can call upon to say, well, this is why we're confident we can deliver what it is we're proposing. Does it need to be this particular project has been done 10 times over, but we've got something that makes us the right people to tackle this problem. And then the final thing, as ever, is making sure that the cause is really clear and really well defined in terms of appealing to people, because ultimately the people on the other side of these grant applications are also people. They'll be reading and reviewing these applications, and it has to really resonate that the need is profound, it's strong, and you're competing with lots of other organisations who will also have really strong causes that they're looking to address. So it needs to be unavoidably clear when you read the application. This is the challenge. This is what we're trying to solve, and that needs to connect to the people reading it, which will segue nicely to the next slide. So it was almost without fail, any application, funding application that you submit to a trusted foundation, grant giving body, will have to kind of follow this continuum at some level to tell that story. And I think we mentioned storytelling earlier, and it's really crucial that there needs to be a logical flow from identifying the real problems and challenges at the start of the story to, at the end of the story, getting to a point where we're saying, and this is the impact, this is the difference that will be made by us receiving a grant from you, the grant maker. So the starting point is that defining that need. So what are the challenges, problems that we're looking to address? There has to be a starting point if there's something that needs to be addressed here, and then something that needs really focused work to make a difference to. So it's being absolutely clear on what that challenge is, who the people are who are suffering from that challenge, so really clear target group, and then also evidencing that. So how do you know this is a challenge? And that can be from statistical evidence that exists to kind of evidence that challenge, or it can be to a point anecdotal when you've got some evidence from the people that you're working with. It can be backed up by direct consultation that you've carried out with those target user groups to clarify what the needs are. So it can be a real mix of things to evidence the need, but there needs to be something beyond just, well, we think there's a challenge here, so we're going to address it. There needs to be some evidence to say, here is the problem, and this is what would happen if the problem wasn't being addressed. Which then takes us into the next part, which is, okay, we've identified a really clear problem. What are the activities, what are the things we're going to do to try and address the problem? So what is it we're going to deliver? Where are we going to deliver? Who's going to be on the receiving end of these activities that we're proposing, this intervention, and why is this the right thing rather than something else? So again, it's just evidencing a really logical link. This is the challenge. Here are the things we're going to do to address that challenge, and that makes sense. And then ultimately, at the final part, this is what will happen as a result of that. So these activities addressing that need will lead to this change, and there has to be a real change and an impact to make it worthwhile. So that we need to be able to evidence why. Again, we won't have necessarily have the data to back up the impact, but it has to make sense to the reader. I can see with that challenge, those activities, this is likely to happen. So this will be the impact. This is what you, the funder, can say at the end of the year in your annual report. We funded X organisation, and they delivered this real change to this specific problem. So that just can't emphasise enough how important this continuum is to demonstrating why you should receive funding from any particular funder.
Great, thank you, Luke. So moving away then from the application itself and the bid writing itself, funders do have other expectations beyond the kind of, I guess, core principles that Luke just took you through. You know, there are some fundamentals around eligibility. So, you know, for the majority of opportunities, those kind of 5 key points that we've highlighted there in the top half of this slide are the bare minimum that you need to be eligible. So you have to be not-for-profit, you have to have at least 3 non-related, non-cohabiting directors on your board or your committee. You need to have a bank account in the name of your organisation, your own set of accounts, and your constitution itself has to include a dissolution clause, which is effectively just a clause that dictates that if your organisation was to be ever wound up, the money from any grant that you received would then be distributed to a similar organisation, so you know, another not-for-profit organisation, and not go back to a director or a shareholder or any individual or a for-profit business. So those are kind of basic eligibility criteria. I've seen one of the questions we've just had in that we'll directly address at the end of the call is around, you know, actually many funders will not fund housing associations because they're not many are not necessarily registered charities, or they don't necessarily like the term or the perception of a housing association. That does obviously still remain the case. You know, housing associations have far fewer grant opportunities available to them than registered charities more broadly. However, it's starting to shift. I think what we're seeing is, you know, particularly with COVID related funding that's come out, is that, you know, almost, you know, effectively any non-profit can access those opportunities. So funders are starting to be a bit more relaxed about that. Hopefully that's something that might stay beyond this. You know, other ways, I suppose, of not necessarily getting around that, but you know, being able to access some of those opportunities is, you know, many organisations set up independent charities or not-for-profit organisations that are, you know, there to serve their users, their communities, rather than look after the housing stock specifically. And, you know, those might be registered charities or not-for-profit entities with their own bank account, meeting all of these eligibility criteria, that are then eligible to access much of this funding. Beyond that kind of core eligibility, though, there are a couple of things that you should be considering when you're presenting your case to these funders. So, you know, many funders will look beyond just the basic criteria and consider your reserves. So, you know, if those organisations with huge levels of reserve, you know, more than 6 months worth of reserve in some cases, you know, funders might, you know, certain funds will ask questions about that. They'll want to understand, you know, what's the purpose of those reserves? Why can't you fund this project or this activity yourselves? And, you know, quite often there is a good reason behind that, but it does automatically, you know, cause a funder to ask questions. You know, they'll look at how your accounts have been for the last 3 years. You know, what your financial performance has been over that period. So are you reporting a deficit? Because, you know, they might not want to be investing in an organisation that is repeatedly, you know, not generating the income it needs to, you know, meet its expenditure, and they would consider that probably a more risky investment. You know, obviously we've made reference to it quite a few times already, but the size of the organisation and their turnover is often a limiting factor with grant opportunities. So, you know, as we've seen for some of those opportunities we mentioned, there is quite often a turnover limit, and that's again because, you know, funders tend to prioritise smaller organisations, which does put smaller housing associations, I suppose, at an advantage in this space compared to larger associations. For particularly those organisations particularly those funders, that are, you know, making, you know, grants of upwards of £50,000 or multi-year grants, you know, that can be 6 figures, they will have a good look at an organisation's track record in fundraising. So how have they managed grants in the past? You know, have they been able to successfully access funding that's, you know, significant funding, and then successfully report on that funding to another grant maker? And then, you know, of course, they will look at things around, you know, any inquiries by the Charity Commission into an organisation or any other kind of statutory inquiries to make sure that the organisation they're funding is well run and is a low risk investment for them. I guess other kind of key things to think about, and we're going to come on to some other key areas as we draw to a close, but it shouldn't be underestimated how important it is to be able to demonstrate your track record as an organisation and your impact as an organisation when you're seeking funding. So whether that is for the specific project you're seeking funding for, or for your organisation as a whole, you need to be able to demonstrate, that you are confident that you can deliver what you're saying you can deliver, and the impact it will have on the communities and individuals you're looking to impact. There are so many ways you can do that, and we spoke a little about this in our last webinar. Depending on the size of the funding that you're looking for, funders will have different expectations about what kind of evidence they'll want to see. So, if you're applying for £5,000 or £10,000, funders won't expect you to have gone and done a huge independent evaluation or commissioned an external partner to evaluate your impact. Really, what they'll be looking for is elements of self-assessment. It might be a pre and post project survey that you've done on your previous participants in your work, and that it doesn't have to be particularly scientific. It's just a demonstration that you are looking to evaluate your impact, looking to demonstrate your outcomes, and improve on those outcomes on an ongoing basis. You might have an annual report that details your community investment activity. What does that impact look like? How do you demonstrate exactly what you're using the money to do, and how far your money is going? When you start to get into the bigger opportunities, the £50,000 plus opportunities, funders will expect to see independent evaluation. Those might be academic-led studies, there might be research agency-led studies where you've commissioned an organisation to look at the impact you're having. There are so many organisations and academic institutions out there who provide that kind of support. Many organisations we know of go and get a PhD student to do studies on their work and things like that. So there are lots of ways of doing that, but it's not necessarily something that you need to worry about until you're seeking those larger grant opportunities. On a very basic level, there are lots of software packages out there that can help you to evaluate your impact and monitor and track your activity on an ongoing basis. Software companies like Upshot and Views are two of the commonly used ones, where organisations can record outcomes from each of their projects, and just makes that kind of reporting at the end a lot easier. On this slide, we've made reference to the Esme Fairbairn Foundation, who are a huge grant maker here in the UK, who've recently published a list of free or low-cost evaluation resources for organisations like yourselves. So the link's there at the bottom, but you should be able to find it relatively easily on their website. Monitoring and evaluation is a huge topic in itself, but I think when you're seeking funding under £50,000, it doesn't need to be overcomplicated. Simple surveys, simple one-to-one interviews and conversations with your participants and your beneficiaries are the best way to illustrate impact. Once you start going beyond that, that's when you need to start investing in partners and independent evaluation. So then, kind of drawing to a close on the session so far. So there are a number of additional areas for consideration that are worth looking at when you're thinking about your approach to grant makers. I think the big one here is around user-led design and consultation. So over the last 5 years, 6 years, there has been a huge increase in the number of grant makers who are focusing on user-led projects and user-led initiatives. So quite often within your application, within your bid, you need to demonstrate how the project that you're proposing has been designed or created by your end beneficiaries. So that might be residents groups, it might be young people, whoever it is that you're looking to deliver the work to needs to have played a significant part in the design of the activities. The theory is that they will know their needs and their challenges better, and they will know what they need to support them and better, and so that's a really increasing trend at the moment, and demonstrating that via consultation. So how have you worked with your community to pull this bid together? Have you done a survey ahead of pulling the bid together to understand need? What kind of research have you done to to really demonstrate that this is an activity, a project, a service that's needed by your community. Have you held focus groups? Have you had interviews? Have you had informal conversations? A bit similar to what the last slide around impact reporting. You don't need to necessarily commission a big research study ahead of designing your bid and putting your proposal together. It could be just direct conversations with the ultimate beneficiaries, depending on the scale of the bid you're going for. One of the points we made right at the start of this presentation was around working in partnership. Again, there's a big trend at the moment amongst grant makers, encouraging organisations, to work together when they're applying. So, it's a very increasingly competitive landscape out there. You have a much better chance of success if you're submitting as a consortium than you do as an individual organisation. Making sure that when you are working in partnership, it's clear that what roles and responsibilities are of the partners involved. What does this partner bring against your own expertise? But just demonstrating that you're not competing with other organisations, you're looking to work with other organisations in order to be successful and ultimately deliver for the benefit of your residents and users. It's pleasing to see that many funders now are starting to consider full cost recovery in their funding. So, historically, most grant makers would have only funded direct project-related costs as a result of, if you wanted to deliver a said project. But now funders are starting to adopt a model where actually, they will take into account other factors, like actually it might require X amount of your leadership team to be involved in a particular project in order for it to be successful, even though they're not directly delivering on the project, or attributing utilities costs to a particular project, where in the past they would have completely refused applications for those kind of things. So it's a good trend to see that funders are starting to consider those additional costs, so that you don't have to deliver a project entirely at cost, or even making a loss in some cases in the past. One of the other areas really which we haven't had a chance today, I suppose, to get into, is that many funders, many grant makers are really open to conversations before you pull a proposal together and approach them. The most successful partnerships with funders are those that have been stewarded over a period of time. So you might have identified someone in the organisation who you can go and speak to, talk to them about your project, about the needs of your user groups. And almost shaped the proposal with them, get an understanding of their needs, their priorities as a funder, and their preferred communication methods, what they want to see in a proposal. So even if it's just a single conversation on the phone before you apply, right the way through to inviting funders to events that you're holding, and having a sustained period of dialogue with them. We would always encourage organisations to try and steward those relationships before they submit. It's not always possible. Some of the bigger funders, for example, who are inundated with applications, might still to this day refuse any conversation before applying. But we're definitely seeing that people like the National Lottery Community Fund and others are starting to move towards a more conversation-based application process, rather than just formally writing a form and submitting it cold. I think that's probably everything that we wanted to cover today. A bit of a whistle-stop tour to grant giving, but hopefully there's quite a few opportunities there and food for thought for the future. I'm just going to hand over to Luke to bring us home.
Brilliant, thank you, Roel. And I think, just to summarise, I guess, in terms of the kind of core messages we want to leave you with, and I think it's daunting. And if you don't live and breathe grant funding, and you don't have the capacity or the dedicated resource to be doing all the things we've talked about today in terms of finding opportunities and then being able to write the bids, it can be quite a challenge to think about where do I even start. And it's not easy, but there's just so much opportunity out there, and I think hopefully what we've tried to do today is demonstrate some of that. And there's so much potential for you as organisations that you can tap into the work that you're doing. And we know it from the housing providers we've already worked with and the success we've got for them. it can be done, and I guess that's why organisations like us exist, so that we can come in and help you with that. So just in terms of how we can help, I think just would be great. We would love it if any of you just thought be worth a conversation with us, and we can just talk to you about your challenges and needs, and completely at no cost, then give you kind of a bespoke prospect list of here are some opportunities that we think would really work for you based on what we know about you. So please pick up the phone or get in touch with us, and we'll be more than happy to talk to you about that. Like I say, no cost at all, just to see how we could possibly help in the longer term. But yeah, please leave this with a real optimism about what's out there for you. And yeah, like I say, thanks again for taking the time to listen to us. Yeah, we really appreciate it.
Brilliant. Thanks, Luke and Rahul. That was really comprehensive, really good, but somehow you've managed to distill, I think, the critical kind of path, I guess, to succeeding in this, especially in conjunction with your previous webinar. So I think the two things together probably offer people quite a good toolkit to get their heads around this. And yeah, certainly that offer of a free conversation, I think, would be most helpful for, yeah, particularly those smaller organizations. It picks up Andrew Furtek's point on this, is it is a real struggle to devote resources to actually nail this. So yeah, your offer of a chat is most welcome. To what extent, this might sound a bit outrageous, but I mean, are you able to provide support almost like on a no-win, no-fee basis, or no-win, partial fee, or are you able to provide that kind of support for those organizations where an opportunity has been identified, but they just can't get the bid together?
Yeah, this is a classic question that we get asked. I think there's lots of different ways that we can kind of work with organizations, and lots of different fee structures that we can come up with, but it's not a model that we operate, the kind of no-win, no-fee. We don't believe that in terms of as a strategic focus, that's the best way to deliver value. And it's really heavily discouraged within the fundraising sector as well. The fundraising regulator doesn't approve of that practice for a whole multitude of reasons. So whilst that isn't a model necessarily that we would look at, there's lots of different ways that we could obviously try and de-risk the kind of relationship, because I totally respect that for lots of smaller organizations, it's a big challenge sometimes to be paying out fees for consultants. So we have lots of different ways that we can help reduce that risk. Not explicitly no-win, no-fee isn't the way that we would operate.
Okay, no, I thought it might be a bit of an outrageous question, but the important thing is if our members pick up the blower and have a conversation with you, you can chart a way forward that's proportionate and right for them anyway.
Of course.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, now we've still got a couple of minutes, so if anybody's got any burning questions, get them in. Meanwhile, I'd just like to revisit Peter's question, which I'll just read it out again. What Peter's saying down in Cornwall is that in the past, some grant-giving bodies have refused to consider bids from anything called a housing association. Any tips on how these bodies can be persuaded to look beyond the label and instead of consider the substance of the bid and the nature of the organisation? So I guess it'd be really interesting to try and work out why they have an objection to housing associations, and how do we change the viewpoint across so many grant-giving bodies? Any thoughts?
It's a good point. It's an interesting one, because we see that also in other sectors as well. You know, we see that amongst, for example, schools and academy trusts who have often been rejected, in the past, or not able to approach funders, because they've been seen as kind of a statutory responsibility. I think the perception of some housing associations is that they're quite sizable. That they, have, well, at least from a turnover point of view, are quite sizable compared to some other, some of the other charities out there and smaller community groups, or they sit on, or they have assets that, kind of, put you in a different slant to some other, organisations that are out there in need of funding. but I think I made the point earlier that I think we're starting to see funders be a bit more relaxed about that across all sectors. So in education, in the housing sector, we're starting to see that the term non-profit and the use of a non-profit organisation be a bit more relaxed. So funders are starting to shift towards, you know, just being open to any and all organisations who are not for profit, and recognising that there isn't a single, you know, best model for delivering not for profit activity. That being said, there are still some funders who won't, you know, who are a bit further behind in that path, and just, you know, will flat out refuse to fund, you know, housing associations at the moment. For those funders, you know, what we would suggest is if it's a particularly good opportunity for your user groups, for your community members, is to look at partnership opportunities. So are there community groups, registered charities in your, you know, amongst your residents, amongst the communities that might be better placed to lead on a bid, you know, to secure funding from that particular organisation, at least for now? Or is there an opportunity for you to set up your own without getting it too much into that? We don't want to actively encourage organisations to go out and set up new charities all the time, but sometimes it might be the best solution for your users or in your community groups. And then really it's just to make sure that, you know, before you put in any time in putting a proposal together, is if a funder is, you know, strictly saying that they won't fund, you know, a particular type of organisation, don't even try and shift their mindset on your own. I think that's something that they're going to have, you know, it's just going to take, it's going to, you know, follow a natural course that, you know, those funders will eventually catch up with other funders in the sector who are starting to shift that way. I think the points Luke made around, you know, being able to demonstrate why you're the right organisation, that you have a track record in delivering impact amongst particular target groups, is a good way of demonstrating that you're better placed than others to be successful. But there are, like I said, there are some funders who, you know, still, you know, you're effectively, when you put in a proposal, it's going to be reviewed by a grant manager or an assessor at the other end, who's going to follow a very strict eligibility criteria most of the time, and they're not going to be open to kind of nuances around what, you know, your belief that the housing association is the right fit. I think, yeah, those kind of things are going to take time to shift in the sector. Okay.
Thanks, that's useful. I think we're up to our appointed time. Just a quick one from me. Your second grant that you kind of showcased there, the sports related one, about sorting out communal space, whether it's inside or out. Obviously, we've got a lot of supportive providers, including Housing for Older People, who are kind of wrestling with the best use of their communal space, particularly their internal communal space. I noted it was about having a sports dimension to it. Does it have to be exclusively sports dimension? But if those guys are using their communal space for, say, yoga and for kind of seated aerobics or something like that, but they only use it for that 10% of the time, could they still avail themselves of that opportunity?
Yeah, I think that particular opportunity is prioritising sport and physical activity. So yeah, yoga and chair-based exercises do fit that description. I think it would probably be worth a conversation with the funder about the how much of that time is being used for physical activity. There is no fixed amount. I think they are prioritising those that are obviously able to deliver a significant increase in the number of hours of physical activity being delivered.
Right.
So it is mainly a sport focused opportunity. That being said, there are opportunities out there for exactly what you're suggesting there.
Yeah.
So yeah, that might not be the right one, but it's definitely worth the conversation with the funder.
Okay, that's brilliant. We're definitely up to our allotted time. Once again, guys, thanks for coming back. Thanks for giving us, and thanks for tailoring it so much to smaller housing associations, which obviously to our kind of constituency, that's just so important. Again, really, really useful toolkit across the two presentations that you've done. It would be great to see you again at some point in the future, but thanks so much. I'd also like to say thanks to everybody who's
Cheers, guys.
Thanks everyone.
Bye.